In today's conversation, I'm talking with Dr. Haydon Mort. Now, Haydon is the director of Geologize, a company he founded to help geologists communicate better with all stakeholders, from landowners to investors, students, and governments. Firstly, welcome, Haydon. It's good to be chatting with you again, although it would be nice in face-to-face one day.
Yeah, good to see you, John, and thanks for having me on.
Thank you yourself. So to kick things off, I guess starting off with the background of how did Geologize get started, and what's your background?
I'm a geochemist by training. I did a PhD in paleoenvironmental oceanography, did a postdoc in the Netherlands, and I spent a stint of 7 years in Brazil. And that's when I first started collaborating with the extractive sector, specifically Petrobras, actually. And, throughout all of this time, I became fascinated by various facets of communication. I guess, I can piece myself together as a jumble of my mom and my dad. My dad's a scientist and my mom is more in humanity. She does painting, she does music, and I guess I'm a mishmash of those two. And so these two worlds collided gradually over time, and then combined with this love and interest in neuroscience that I developed in the early noughties. And, I just been fascinated with this science of attention and memory formation. And as I played around with ways to communicate, which is kind of my natural instinct to do that, I suddenly started realizing that this hobby of brain science was actually quite a powerful way to fine tune this art that I liked, just like enjoyed doing. And so I would develop techniques in the lecture theatre in Brazil, despite my limited Portuguese at the time, that really flew well with students. And I was quickly doing these like optional disciplines, in communication or petroleum geochemistry, which became kind of full of people because they found that the way that I taught them resonated and was kind of intuitive. So I knew I was onto something at the time. And then after I left Brazil, I suddenly realized, because I was now in the real world, not the academic ivory tower world, in Brazil, which actually is well fed of geoscience. There's no recruitment problem in Brazil. Everybody wants to go to do geology in Brazil because they think it's going to go straight to Petrobras, Vale, and all the other majors. So that wasn't a problem. But when I moved back to the UK, I suddenly saw that there was this recruitment crisis happening at university in the mining sector. And this was a huge problem, especially if we want to tackle these major challenges, the challenges of our day, such as climate change and resource management. And I thought, well, everyone's talking about that we need to communicate what we do more effectively with society. Everyone's saying that we need that social license to operate. And they're saying we need to go out and we need to talk more. We need to wave phones in faces and say, do you know how many minerals inside your smartphone and all that kind of stuff? And then I was thinking, well, that actually is kind of wrong. From a brain science point of view, it makes sense from our point of view because that resonates with us. We feel good about ourselves. But as soon as you start imagining the reality, which is people are either ambivalent or hostile to mining, then you hit up a roadblock, which we might come on to, where people just don't trust a vested interest. And so I wanted to develop a training program for all geoscientists at the time, it wasn't for the mining industry, all geoscientists to tackle the root cause of the talent pipeline crisis and the enrollment crisis at university. How can we shift public perception? Because we only don't only want to communicate with kids who are choosing what they want to do at high school, but also their parents who are very influential on their kids' decisions. I know don't do geography, that's a waste of time. Do this, that, and the other. We want to really create a groundswell shift in public perception and feeling and sentiment about the geosciences and about human connections to the earth so people can actually make their own decisions. And we kind of like cajole them in the nicest possible way to study the geosciences. And so that's why I created my first training program, Practical Geocommunication. It was very, very practical in nature, and it trained all geoscientists of all colors to communicate powerfully with the public in various areas, so social media, going to schools, misinformation in the media, and all kinds of stuff, geoparks, geotourism. And that was very, very well received. But ever since almost like week two of that training, back at the beginning of the pandemic, people from the mining sector said, "This is great. You know what? It would be even better if you created something for the mining sector, because we really struggle with all of those problems, but this whole special suite of problems, that are specific to us, such as social license to operate, such as communicating with investors, such as indigenous peoples, and how we can engage with respect and empathy with them." And so that was a process that took a long time, about 18 months to create. And that was just launched back in November. And yeah, that's a brief history of Geologize. I hope that clarifies it.
Fantastic. You touched off on a lot of things that I wanted to ask you already. So yeah, firstly, the new students coming in, we feel it over in Australia as well. Even though it's a massive Australian mining country, there's just not that inflow of coming in due to communication issues primarily, I believe.
Yeah.
But also that idea of that using hypocrisy to get people involved with their mobile phone, the talk of, if you don't have mining, you don't have us. It's it's not getting through because there's a lot of people that have been doing it. So I really like what you're doing, and I have had a look. Started going through your mining communication course, and I think it's really required at the moment. It's a hot topic and it's required. So I guess there's a bunch of questions I want to ask you, but in your video series, yeah, you actually mentioned the advocacy paradox, which is quite pertinent to what you were just saying, and the importance of trust. And what is this, and how can it be fixed?
Okay, so what is it is really intuitive, because we experience the advocacy paradox every day. Whenever we watch an advertisement on television, we will ignore it or we will pay attention to it, depending on how good the propaganda people are at grabbing our attention. But at the end of the day, we know that the person selling something on TV or on YouTube is getting paid, and therefore we are accordingly less likely to click, and we're less likely to buy it because they have a vested interest. And so the mining industry has a vested interest in mining. Goes without saying. It's vested interest in extraction and bringing raw materials to market. How can the mining industry advocate for itself? How can a mining body such as the AMEA or the AusIMM or anybody, or the Critical Minerals Association, how can they go out to schools or do public outreach if mining or critical minerals is in their name? If they have their branding affiliated with it in any way, it's very easy for the public to lose interest. So I mentioned to you that I liked to study brain science. And so there's part of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, which evaluates conflicting information. And it creates this feeling of cognitive dissonance or disbelief or suspicion when you encounter a piece of information which doesn't quite add up. So you have one piece of information, this is a mining company. And you have another information, which is what the mining company is saying, which is mining is really important to our daily lives. It doesn't matter, actually, how correct that information is. It could be perfectly correct. It is actually perfectly correct. But so long as the ACC, anterior cingulate cortex, is activated, then people will go away from that, from listening to that content, feeling proportionally less interested. And so the louder a mining company or a mining organization advocates, the more it is subject to diminishing returns in terms of the attention it is afforded by the listener's brain. That is just, cognitive science. There are ways to get around, which we'll get onto. But so far, the mining industry hasn't embraced the fact that it is communicating with close relatives of chimpanzees. Okay, well, that is a fact, right? That's what we are. We are, as Charles Darwin, we hold, as Charles Darwin said, the lowly stamp. Oh, sorry, the stamp of our lowly origins. That is the ancient part of our brain. We have to deal with this reality. And so we need to develop strategies which are more sideways, which circumvent this, what we call the advocacy paradox. And one example I use in the course is if the Pope says he believes in God, he's just doing his job. If he says he doesn't believe in God, he might be onto something, right? You want to listen to that. That's something you would not expect the Pope to say. Okay. And so it literally grabs the attention. So how can the mining industry piggyback onto this? How can it develop ways of communication which actually do not trigger the ACC and actually garner trust? Because that is the critical currency that it needs to move forward, especially with regards to social license to operate.
Absolutely. I mean, that how do you go about that though? Because like, is it getting people who don't have a vested interest talking about this thing, or how would you go about fixing that issue?
Okay, so there are a few things that you can do. One, you've just mentioned, very good idea, and that is to collaborate with people who are maybe typically antagonistic to mining or actually reach out. And so mining companies often won't even bother communicating or reaching out to the likes of, for example, Extinction Rebellion, right? Because they are self-declared anti-mining. Now, the fact that they haven't even bothered to reach out is a problem, right? And in Extinction Rebellion won't even reach out to mining. They just don't talk to each other.
Hmm.
I see the PDAC every year in Toronto. There's nobody goes to actually talk to the protesters outside the metro center. It just doesn't happen. So actually having that conversation and building those bridges can actually help, because if you were to get the likes of Extinction Rebellion to say something, not specifically advocating for the mining sector, but for example, identifying a player which is promoting equality and giving back very tangibly to the local population, and actually having a plan for closure before they start to extract, and actually empowering local communities and tackling, having a net zero plan. If they were to be brought on side to collaborate on that framework and in a way which would earn their seal of approval, they could actually consciously put their stamp of approval on that, then suddenly you have the possibility of a mining operation being endorsed by Extinction Rebellion. That would be Extinction Rebellion advocating for a mining operation which is totally evidence against interest. That's the Pope saying he doesn't believe in God. And then you have the public and the media, mass media, paying attention to that. And you also have target, target impact and ESG investors paying attention to that. And suddenly that mining operation stock is probably going to take off significantly too. So there's a financial interest in doing this kind of thing. You're actually diversifying your investor demographic. No, that's the one thing. Okay, now, but before I go on, I'm sure people are listening are going to thinking, hey, give me a break. You're not going to get Extinction Rebellion to endorse a mine site. Wrong, because I've actually met and had coffee with the founder of Extinction Rebellion, because Geologize tries, in some cases, to act as a go-between between environmental charities and, extractive industries to facilitate that dialogue. And this person said, I, the founder, I know mining is important. I know we need mining. It's just that we haven't seen any mining operation which can meet the standard that we could publicly endorse. Our membership is very skeptical about mining. And so we need to look after our membership. So this is really powerful intelligence, by the way, for the mining industry. I'm providing a way in that if you want to win support, you need to be very aware of their own internal constraints. Okay. Try to cater for those. And also be aware of the boxes that they would need to hypothetically jump through, that the mining company would jump through in order to start that dialogue, to actually garner that trust. So this person didn't close the door at all. She said, in theory, we would be happy to work with the mining company. They never come to us.
Mm.
And so this should be a wake-up call. It might look really hopeless, but it is certainly worth investing time and money in and getting this right. Not just for your social license, but as I said, for your investor demographics too. Then the other things that I would recommend is stop talking about how important you are. If you go to a major's Instagram, where most mining companies don't have Instagram, but the majors do, but it's really a box ticking exercise to say that they're doing some kind of outreach on a popular platform. And it's a mixture of, you know, shiny, happy people, right? Perfectly gender balanced, race balanced, everything balanced. And also information about interim dividend payments. Right. So it's really catered for um, existing shareholders to make them feel good about their investment. But as again, because of the advocacy paradox, if somebody was to come to that site, to that Instagram page, it would be like, this is whitewash. It looks way too perfect, right? It's
Mm.
whitewash, it's greenwash. There's no way, and there's a mining company saying that they're doing everything so perfectly. How are we supposed to believe this? This is advocacy paradox 101. So it doesn't have an impact. The other thing that they do on these pages is that they post and they ghost. In other words, that they just post stuff out there about some great project that they're doing. A bunch of people post comments which are negative. They never solicit feedback. They never respond to these comments. They never do anything. And giving people the silent treatment doesn't garner trust. It's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
So the thing that they should be doing, rather than selling themselves, is actually listening more. And now this sounds like it might be a waste of time, but the more you listen, which at the end of the day is half of communication. Okay. I feel like I'm talking too much, by the way, John, but you've asked me a question, so
No, go for it.
um, if you're going to communicate, you have to listen. And before you even open your mouth and say, but we are doing this, right? You need to, again, work with the brain, right? You need to do something called tactical empathy or strategic empathy. So you reflect and you label the concerns of the person. Immediately, the person understands that you actually heard them, right? That most of the time, the people don't even feel heard. Now, a human to a human is better face to face, but you can do that on social media if you're creative. You can actually listen and you can say, so and so said this, that, and the You're actually labeling people's concerns, and people feel heard and they feel validated. That is a huge emotional obstacle already starting to melt away. And so your goal here is to bring opposition closer to your position. Yeah, that's not the end of it, obviously, but at least the conversation has started and you haven't ended it before it's even begun by saying how important you are. Okay. And then afterwards, you need to go out of your way. There's the other thing that I talk about quite a lot is power asymmetry. Now, if you're a multi-billion-dollar corporation or even a mid-tier, you have a lot more money than what you might be heavily in debt. It doesn't matter. Your stock prices, you're worth millions. And so the perception of the general member of the public or the indigenous community is that you are powerful, you have lawyers, you have the money and the resources, and they don't, right? And that power asymmetry also activates various neural pathways which cause people to become defensive and run sometimes or offensive. And so you need to do everything you can to empower, reduce your power um, in real and perceived terms, and empower the people that you're trying to speak to, giving them the platform and them the voice to let them speak as much as possible. Now, when it comes to on the ground mining operation, means collaboration. It means bringing them into the boardroom and actually, or, sitting down with them at the table and saying, let's plan for closure together. What do you want it to look like? Yeah. We're not getting some landscapers or some engineers to do it and then presenting it to them. We're asking them, what would you like to do? And so you're planning for closure before you take anything out of the ground. Right?
Yep.
And then suddenly they become collaborators in the project. They've already felt validated and heard. That has gone away. And then you're pulling them closer by saying, now it's over to you. What do you want to happen with this? How can we make it the best possible landscape for you? All right. And, and then be transparent, completely transparent. There will be noise. This is evidence against interest. There will be noise. There will be disruption. It's going to last this long. You could harness AI or, immersive virtual reality by actually having them see, like tangibly see what it's going to look like and how it's not going to or it will impact them. People appreciate that level of transparency. You shouldn't be afraid about it. You shouldn't not run away from that. Because if you don't do that, and then there's a surprise they didn't expect, then they have every right, in my opinion, to rescind that social license they give you. Excuse me. So I feel I've spoken quite a lot, but there's a lot that can be done
Yep.
to reduce that power asymmetry and reduce the advocacy paradox.
I tend to agree with everything you said there. Now, as far as the biggest problem I see with this coming from the mining industry, heavily myself, like working as a geologist in both mining and exploration, is that this isn't something that can be measured with a KPI, and that's where I see I guess the biggest hurdle that needs to be overcome. Do you have any ideas about how to break down that traditional version of here's the input, here's the output type of situation with communication?
Yeah, KPIs is tricky because we're talking about social license here. And so the KPI would be, in this case, time to extraction, right? From exploration to extraction. The biggest obstacle, as you know, is permitting and permitting is heavily influenced by policymakers, and policymakers are influenced by voters, and it all becomes very convoluted. And so a KPI will be delivered over, well, currently, what is it, like 15 to 20 years to bring a mine site to operation? That's a disaster for the energy transition. So a potential KPI would be it takes 5 years, right? And that's because all these strategies, I remember I've just come to market with mining communication and I'm putting out some pretty, well, some of it's radical and some of it's just, well, it's all kind of bog standard neuroscience, to be honest with you. But this never been brought to the attention, I guess, mining companies. So I don't have a serious KPIs. What I can tell you is that I've been approached by numerous engineers and geologists who have worked on mine sites in Australia and in North America. And they've actually told me what their experiences has been like in town hall meetings where they've faced hostile community opposition. And they've done these events, over several years. And most of the time, it's a bit of a disaster because they're kind of shot down in flames, and people feel like the mining companies just come there to inform them of what's happening and not really to listen very much. And many of these people have done my training, practical geocommunication, the first one, which goes a lot into empathy and neurology and stuff like that. And they've been able to implement it into their workflow and their town hall meeting. And what's happened is that the public are not entirely won over, but they feel like they've been heard and they feel like they want to collaborate. And so there's a lot more goodwill towards that mining operation that wasn't there before. Now, that's to use an overused pun, that's gold dust for the mining operation. That seriously, you can see now that if you are bringing that affected community on board, you're going to significantly reduce your time to extraction. Now, for some reason, these um, these achievements aren't very prominent in investor pitches at mining conferences, such as Resourcing Tomorrow or whatever. You know, what we see is like how many ounces, right? What's the grade, and how it's all going to be awesome and stuff like. But community opposition and and this is how many people have actually come to support us. This is who we're working with. That's pretty low key or non-existent in most of these pitches. That's why you get the same kind of investors all the time investing. And so
Mm.
I would really recommend to mining companies that they invest a lot more in communication and getting that license, because then you'll see the KPI, and the KPI will be, as I said, time to extraction, and also your investment and your stock price. Because I know, because I speak with impact investors a lot, and they say they want to invest in mining, but they can't invest very much.
Mm.
And show me a company that's doing the right thing, and we'll be proud to put our money where our mouth is in this case. And so the KPI again would be the stock price. So, it's all a little bit intangible. It is a bit more long term, and I completely hear your point. Mid management, KPI, KPI.
Yeah.
But seriously, this is serious business, and a lot of these companies save billions because of, I'm sorry, not billions, hundreds of millions maybe, because they've reduced their time to like 5 years rather than 15. You can imagine the impact.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, it's a huge issue within Europe, as you're likely aware. Yeah, this whole social license to operate, and especially in Australia as well. I mean, it's worldwide at the moment. We spoke a lot about mining companies who have those bigger budgets, and they have the bigger time frames that they can kind of do these 10+ year investments, I guess. For the junior side of things, do you have any kind of advice for them on how they could do this in a cost effective way, for someone who doesn't know how they're going to be getting their money next year, in a situation like that?
So, in this case, social media really comes to the fore, in my opinion. Um, it is word of mouth on steroids, and it's cheap. It's really cheap. In my opinion, having a well curated, and when I say well curated, I don't mean beautiful, I mean organic, in a way which utilizes the tools available to you to garner comments and feedback and to listen, right? So it's like you can listen and produce content based on what people are concerned about. And you can use paid promotion. There's no shame in using paid promotion to reach the target audience or the community. So you can get a granular level of getting that engagement and the local community engagement. To do that, this is a drop in the ocean for a junior's budget. Okay. And I would argue that bringing somebody on board dedicated for that role who has experience in social media marketing, or psychologist even collaborating with this kind of stuff, social psychologist, then you are able to be one of those successful mining operations. Now, most of the juniors, you correct me if I'm wrong because I'm not from the sector, but a lot of them are bought up by a major, for example.
Well, that's the
And
goal anyway. Yeah.
that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
Um, a major, one of the majors, of course, they're going to be worried about the grade and how much is in the ground, but they're also concerned about what is the existing social license of that project. How much are we going to get bogged down? It's a very important part of the value proposition. So if that junior wants to get bought up, it might not have the best, right? It might not be hugely profitable. It could be a good profit, I mean, good return, right? But if they've also got that return on that social license that they cultivated through careful social media and public outreach and going to schools and stuff like that, then the major's going to be like, okay, maybe not big bucks, but we're going to make a bit of money on this. We might as well buy it, right? So if the game is to be bought up, it makes perfect sense to do that too. And again, as I said, it's a drop in the bucket when it comes, drop in the ocean when it comes to how much money they spend on extraction and exploration.
Absolutely. That's a very good point you make there, actually. Yeah, it's, and especially when the actual exploration side of things, the drilling costs so much money when you compare it comparatively, it
Yeah.
really is a
Yeah.
small
One
amount.
day of drilling, a
Yeah.
couple of days of drilling is like more than a year you need of on
Yeah.
social media. It's nothing. It really doesn't make any sense that they wouldn't do that. And in fact, many don't. That's the strange thing. And that just highlights the mindset that's in the junior mining sector at the moment.
Aside from mining, Hayden, is there any other topics you feel passionate about that you'd like to discuss?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of touched upon this when I was at PDAC last year, and I met one of the VPs of BHP, and I'm kind of particularly passionate. And maybe this is because my background and my hobby, if you like, in neuroscience, but I'm also dyslexic, and neurodiversity is one of these which topics I think could really be exploited by the mining industry, in fact, all sectors in general. But if you look at other, major corporations like Microsoft and Google, they actually employ people who are neurodivergent on purpose. They actually reverse engineer their job descriptions to target people who are neurodivergent because they want to innovate further and faster than their competitors. So it kind of gives them the edge to have these lateral thinking skills. So if you look on LinkedIn, dyslexic thinking is now a skill you can add to your profile, for example. And we all know that the qualities that somebody who is autistic, I'm not talking about like severely autistic, but a high level autistic thinker can bring immense analytical skills and sideways thinking skills to resolve problems which are sometimes intractable to other people and for mining operations. So when you're dealing with stakeholders, it's almost like a jigsaw. It's like so many moving pieces, and sometimes you need quite a high level of thinking to see how things fit together, especially when it comes to communication. Now, people, with dyslexia, and other neurodivergent conditions have very strong verbal skills, for example. And so you may consider employing one of them to front your verbal to, yeah, your outward facing communication. Um, um, Someone who's autistic would be very good with numbers sometimes, and you might consider employing them for
Hmm.
those kinds of tasks. But there's all kinds of divergencies that when I presented these ideas to the VP in PDAC last year, and he was like, "Wow, this is actually we do nothing like this in the mining sector." And the level of problems that we have sometimes so complicated, we kind of need somebody to come up with some innovative solutions and to see, you know, the forest for the trees. Um, it will be really good if we could actually do something about this. And so I think that is the other thing that I'm kind of passionate about is to, quite apart from, any kind of wishy-washy DEI, policy of a mining company, I'm more interested in the bottom line and how we can exploit these unique skills to make mining operations more successful, because that is what serious corporations, which are bigger than the Rios and bigger than the BHPs, are doing already, especially in the tech sector, to actually innovate fast. And I think the mining industry could take a leaf out of that book and innovate faster too by looking at their diversity strategy and actually actively seeking people with those unique skill sets. So I'm kind of passionate about that too.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'd have to give a shout out actually to my one of my previous employees in Australia, Goldfields. They made an active approach to doing that over the last few years when I was there, and it did have far-reaching effects. Like you say,
Wow.
there's people with everyone's got different skill sets, and if you're all employing the same cut of employee, you're not going to receive that. So that's really good. I like that. Now, I guess it's a good time to say that I'm looking forward to working with you further for myself, for my own personal development as well in communication, because it's something you can always get better at. Do you want to give viewers a quick outline of how you can get involved in the course?
Yeah, so as you know, hopefully people have seen from your posts, Geologize has decided to support you guys, and I think there's a reason for that actually. I've looked at many other communication channels and news outlets for the mining industry, and quite often, and this is replicated in mining conferences too around the world. Quite often, speakers for junior players pay for a spot to speak because they are speaking to investors normally. Now there's obviously it makes financial sense for them to do that, otherwise they wouldn't do it. But it also creates um, somewhat of an advocacy paradox and in its the vested interest. But what I've found from your news sources is you don't take any funds from any mining companies to actually produce news about what's happening in the European mining sector. And I think that for me, that level of transparency and that level of, clearly not invested interest in this case, is something that I can get behind. That's something that's really interesting. So I want to offer uh, free access to mining communication for the first 10 people who get in touch with you on LinkedIn. Okay? So it's normally worth $650. I'm not making any money off this at all. I'm just giving it away. So please don't, shoot me down, anybody. I'm literally giving it away for free. And this training is already, endorsed by, senior figures in the mining sector. So you can check it out. You probably post a link along with this video. Check
Yeah,
out the
we'll do.
course. Look at the content. Hopefully you like it. Look at the explainer video. That's probably the easiest way to get a flavor for it. And then as quickly as possible, get in touch with John, everybody. And he's going to have the coupon code, which will give you free access. Okay. And if you miss that, obviously you know, I can't give it away for free forever. It's just not, that wouldn't be a viable business strategy for me. But afterwards, I'd like to give all listeners of this a 70% discount going forward, because that's my commitment to you as a sponsor of you, that I'd like more people to follow your content, which is totally impartial. And that's something that's important to my mission too. And so to help you grow, I want to give, after that 10 places, 70% discount. And I'll also give John you the coupon for that. And if anybody comes to you after that initial 10 places, they can still get a coupon and they can still get a massive discount on the training. So that's
Fantastic.
what I got. Okay.
Fantastic. No, that's much appreciated. I'm sure there's some students and other people out there who've been looking to get into it, and the money's been a hurdle or whatever. So that's really appreciated. All right. Well, thanks a lot for coming on today, Haydon. It's been great talking to you, and hopefully do it again soon.
Awesome, John. Thanks very much for having me. It was wonderful talking to you. Thank you.
Cheers.